This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Harry Reasoner in New York. And Eric Seberide in Washington. Roger Mudd in Washington. Robert Pierpoint at the White House. Dan Rather in Washington. Hal Walker in Washington. And Charles Kuralt on the road in Yosemite National Park.
Good evening. If news is defined as the unexpected or the unpredictable in human affairs, then tonight the flight of Apollo 11 just does not qualify. For however exciting a space flight may be, even if, as in this case, it is one of the towering events of our history. Nevertheless, once a spaceship leaves its booster, except for such minor corrections as Apollo 11's engines provided today, it's just another little planet, as predictable in its course as Mars or Jupiter or the Moon. And so tonight, Apollo 11 is right where we knew it would be, well over halfway to the Moon, some 145,000 miles from Earth, traveling at a speed and on a course predictable months or years ago. No news in this case is indeed very good news. In fact, the surprising thing about this first full day of the Apollo 11 flight was that the Soviet space program made more news. Russia's unmanned Luna 15 spacecraft went into a close-in orbit around the Moon. Moscow officially saying little, but there's much guesswork that Luna would try a soft landing on the Moon and perhaps try to pick up some lunar surface material for return to Earth. This would be very difficult, but Sir Bernard Lovell, director of Britain's Jodrell Bank Radio Observatory, says he believes the attempt will be made by tomorrow. Sir Bernard also remarked that he and his colleagues at Jodrell Bank are in the fascinating situation of listening to Apollo 11 in one ear and Luna 15 in the other. Bernard Lovell at times has been critical of the value of manned space exploration. But during the day, Neil Armstrong demonstrated its helpfulness in weather forecasting. It happened in this conversation with Mission Control at Houston.
And Houston, we're just looking at you out our window here. Looks like there's a circulation of clouds that just moved east of Houston over the Gulf and Florida area. Did that have any rain in it this morning?
Roger. A report from outside says that it's raining out here, and looks like you got a pretty good eye for the weather there.
Yeah, well, it looks like it ought to clear up pretty soon from our viewpoint. It's the western edge of the weather isn't very far west of you.
Well, in spite of that bit of helpfulness, Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin have already built a reputation of not having much to say, of concentrating strictly on the business at hand. They'll get an opportunity to live down that reputation, or perhaps live up to it, in their next television transmission, which is expected within the hour. Walter Cronkite, CBS News, Space Center, New York.
Nixon revealed today that the Apollo 11 astronauts will leave on the Moon medals of 2 dead Soviet cosmonauts and the flight insignia of 3 American astronauts who have died in their country's space programs. Robert Pierpoint reports.
While conferring a medal on General John McConnell, the retiring Air Force Chief of Staff, President Nixon announced that the Apollo 11 astronauts are carrying to the Moon the insignias of their colleagues who died in the fire of the Apollo 2, and something else as well.
When Frank Borman was in the Soviet Union, he was presented 2 medals from the wives of the cosmonauts, the Russian cosmonauts, who lost their lives in their space program. And at the request of their wives, he will leave those medals on the Moon. And I think this symbolic act of leaving on the Moon, in the one case, the aspects of the medals that those who lost their lives in our space program and the medals of the Soviet cosmonauts indicates the true spirit of the American Armed Forces. We maintain strength, but we maintain it because we want peace.
Later, the president's daughter, Julie, leading a guided tour of the daily duty, interrupted a picture-taking session with some visiting Republican senators. The president could not resist the opportunity to bring the 2 groups together, leaving some tourists very memorable moments. Roger Point, CBS.
Stock and commodity exchanges announced today that they will be closed Monday, July 21st, in observance of the National Day of Participation proclaimed by President Nixon yesterday. Many state and city governments, as well as private businesses, have also decided to close that day in honor of the Apollo 11 moon landing. The latest casualty figures released today in Saigon reflect the month-long lull in South Vietnam's. Eric Severide is back in Washington tonight and has some thoughts on the politics of space after the Apollo 11 mission is completed.
For at least a few moments yesterday when Apollo 11 lifted, millions of people stopped whatever they were doing, and those thousands near the launch site stopped breathing. The world took a brief holiday. It will take another when the astronauts step out on the moon, and still another when they burn through the Earth's atmosphere and splash down into the sea, man's original home. With 3 climactic moments of intense drama, this is perhaps the longest drawn-out performance ever staged. And for a time, after it's all over, a good many familiar quarrels, transactions, and issues are going to seem awfully unimportant, including, one can surmise, President Nixon's flight around the world in one of those curiously antique contraptions known as a jet plane. But fairly soon thereafter, politics will pick up almost, if not quite, where it left off BM, before moon. The fundamental argument here in the Capitol is how we use our money and resources in the AM. Space may be infinite, but not federal budgets. They are finite because human patience, predilections, and goals are both finite and conflicting. There is a powerful push here to reduce our prodigious military expenditures, a fairly strong push to reduce our expenditures on space. The irony of the situation for the space people is that success of Apollo 11 is more likely to mean a slowdown and stretch out of their program than failure. Failure with the Russians breathing on our necks would almost certainly mean redoubled efforts. It was the Soviets' competition and lead, after all, that chiefly motivated President Kennedy's proclamation for man on the moon in this decade. For their own interest, the wisest move the space programmers have made was to invite what looked like at least a quorum of the Congress to witness yesterday's majestic leap toward the moon. There is something about the awesome spectacle that makes it a thing of beauty, clean, positive, measurable, and unarguable. And unlike most political issues and projects, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the moment, for those present, all other considerations, political or financial, are vaporized and vanished. But they will regroup and reappear sooner or later. Politics, Dr. Einstein once said, is more difficult than physics. Harry?
That's the news. This is Harry Reasoner. Good night.